here at Center for Metropolitan Studies, and we are really pleased to receive today the Professor Yuri Kazepov from the University of Vienna, Department of Sociology, who is going to give us a lecture called Space as an Analytical Perspective, How to Analyze Social and Environmental Policies in a Multi-Level Governance Perspective. We are here at SEBRAP and also broadcasting through YouTube. Yuri, thank you very much for being here with us. It's a true pleasure to receive you. Please.
Thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts with you and to be here after 15 years. 15 years ago, in 2009, we had the first RC21 IJUR first doctoral school in comparative urban studies. So it's quite an emotion to be here back again. Let me start immediately. This is are considered separately, environmental policies are considered separately, and there is no dialogue. But actually, it's important to have a dialogue between the two. And then an issue about what about cities in this multi-level framework, and with some examples. I have a lot of examples. I will select only one, which will be on the city of Vienna, because the other example, I think we talked last time as I was here 4 years ago. So let me start with the questions framing the issues. So do you know what the origin of PM 2.5 are? PM 2.5 are very polluting air quality substances. But where are they coming from in cities? Are they coming from the street and the traffic? Are they coming from abroad, international sources? Are they coming from national industry, from cars? From who is the source of this? Do you have any idea? What do you think? You didn't even know PM 2.5 exists? Well, this is a very dangerous particles in the air, which... Traffic? Yes, traffic is for sure one of the sources. Cars, yes, definitely. Well, actually, it's a bit more complicated. And here we have PM 2.5 in Vienna. And as you can see, you have natural sources, international sources, national sources, urban sources, and the street. So when you breathe the air in the street, it's not just the street. It's all these sources at the same time. And that's very interesting because it says it's not only an urban problem, it's a multi-level problem. It's a problem which comes from abroad. It's a problem which comes from the national industry. It's a problem which comes from every single scale. And of course, it differs from country to country and from city to city. For instance, Graz is the second largest city in Austria. And as you can see, the composition is very different. Vienna is exposed to a lot of wind. So a lot of wind brings in sources from international sources. But it shows very clearly that it's never one only scale which produces the problem. And here you can see also what kind of sources the PM 2.5 are produced of. So it's not just traffic, it's also agriculture. And we would never think about agriculture because agriculture, it's nice, it's the green, it's countryside, it's wonderful, but actually it's one of the biggest pollutants. And I guess here in Latin America, and probably more in Argentina, with cows are producing a lot of this kind of substances. But as you can see, even a city like Vienna, which is considered to be the most livable city in the world, apparently, it has the levels of PM 2.5 above the WHO guidelines. So that's quite scary for health. If you have a low income, in some, if any income, in São Paulo, who provides you with social assistance? Where we have here one of the biggest experts on that. So it's not the city of São Paulo. It's actually Bolsa Família, which is a federal program, if I'm not wrong, mistaken. So I think you started studying while the implementation started first. So as you can see, a problem arises in a specific place, but it's something addressed through different sources, different means, different policies, different things. Another set of questions. Are specific buildings or urban settings more sustainable than others? So is this more sustainable? I don't know if you know this. This is in Milan, which is the Bosco Verticale. It's considered a CO2 neutral building. It won 2015 the prize for the best skyscraper in the world. And these trees are wonderful, and there are insects, and the biosphere is perfectly preserved. Is this more sustainable or less sustainable? Probably it's less sustainable, but actually the question is, the first building was environmentally more sustainable, but are they also socially sustainable? Actually, this is it's not so much of an open question. You know how much they pay just for the expenses of running that building per year? 24,000 euro per flat. 24,000 just for running the building, not the rent or the cost, just for running the building. So it's socially not sustainable because it divides the very rich and the very poor, etc., etc. So it's an interesting element because social and environmental sustainability might not go hand in hand, actually. It might exacerbate inequalities in a way. So some of the related challenges to these issues. To understand the multi-level governance of social and environmental policies, we need something. We need to understand how different dimensions that characterize spatial relations influence and contribute to differentiate the multi-level governance arrangements of these policies. Some policies are at the national, federal level. Some policies are even supranational. So you have the Paris agreements for environmental issues, which are not really enforced by all countries, despite the fact that most countries signed these agreements. You have the regional level, you have the local level, you have even the district level in some cities. So we need to understand how these different elements work together. And for this, I am presenting, or I'm proposing you an analytical framework, which I was developing over the years. And this analytical framework, it's actually trying to go beyond contextualities, and it tries to build in the relevance and the importance of a context within the analytical model. We always say the context is important. Everybody says the context is important, but it's not considering this element as a building block of a framework to understand the specific phenomena. And so I developed these 4 analytical dimensions: sovereignty, the policy design, the context, and politics. Politics plays a very important role in all of that. And I will now try to disentangle these 4 elements. So sovereignty. Sovereignty has to do with jurisdictions, which is a very important aspect, and it pertains to the territorial organization of regulatory jurisdictions and the distribution of power and responsibilities within multi-level institutional arrangements. Since the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, actually this pertains to the nation state or the federal state. But actually subnational bodies can have quite some degrees of autonomy. This depends very much on the context, but they can be passive receivers of policies defined at other levels, or they can be more active actors, defining and ruling, developing regulations, if they are within a federal system. So they have degrees of freedom in regulation, in implementation, in funding as well. And this makes, of course, a big difference if you are in a federal system or a state-centered system. Then you have policies and policy instruments. Our friends in Sciences Po have this very specific perspective of considering policy instruments as a privileged entry into understanding how policies work. And this is indeed a very important aspect. Why? Because the institutional design of single policies are connected to specific regulatory principles. So you can have universal policies, you can have means-tested policies, you can have very different policies. And this, in a way, is rooted into specific ideas of social justice and deservingness, actually. Who is deserving? Everybody in a country, or just the ones who are paying contributions, or just the very poor who have an income below a given threshold? So these principles translate into mechanisms which have very specific spatial consequences. So this all sounds very abstract, actually, and it's on purpose very abstract because it has to be possible to apply it everywhere. So jurisdictions are given everywhere, and deservingness is a feature which translates into specific mechanisms everywhere in different ways. So these two, both policies and sovereignty and jurisdictions, produce bordering processes. They border specific communities in specific places. So if you are not in the state of São Paulo, but somewhere else, you might have different rights. Like in Italy, if you are in a specific region, you have specific rights compared to another region. Or in a federal system like Austria, Germany, Belgium, or even the United States, they have very different rights. So it's important to understand the bordering system, because if you are living across the border, you don't have these rights. So that's a very important point. And then you have the context, which I was mentioning before. And the context provides, within specific regulatory jurisdictions, the actual configuration of needs with which current policy instruments must cope. So you have the jurisdictions, you have the policy instruments, and the context produces specific configurations of needs with which the different policy instruments have to cope. And the context influences very much the impact and the effectiveness of policy arrangements. What does it mean? It means that if you have also the very same policy, but you apply it in one context or in another, you might have very different outcomes. If you have participatory budgeting in a very rich city, or if you have participatory budgeting in a very poor city, the impact is completely different. So we need to build in the context in our analytical instruments, so to say. And I will try to make a lot of examples of that. And then you have politics with multiple actors, actually, because politics involves actors and stakeholders which are both public and private, for-profit, non-for-profit, who interact within set jurisdictions. So the mayor of São Paulo has jurisdiction only in São Paulo. He cannot act as a mayor of Rio de Janeiro. No? They would definitely disregard his regulations. So they use specific policy instruments, political actors, producing or reproducing historically and spatially situated forms of inequality. How? Eventually also through scale games. Scale games are very interesting because they show how different jurisdictions at different level rule specific scales, and the actors of these scales sometimes are in conflict. As the governor of São Paulo compared to Bolsonaro, with the example we had during lunch. The resulting spatial patterns of inequality are not fixed. They can change, of course, according to the changes in these three dimensions. So what we need to understand is the relationality and complementarity of these four elements. So they are interacting. And it's through this interaction that they produce very specific outcomes. They produce opportunity structures. How? By framing the relational space within which policies are embedded and contribute both to the definition and the enactment of policies. And in particular through this dynamic with politics playing a very important role, because politics mediates, it puts the problems of the context in relation to the policy instruments, in relation to the jurisdiction within which it all happens. And it produces opportunity structures and specific outcomes in terms of inequalities, in terms of welfare distribution, in terms of participatory opportunities, etc., etc. So in synthesis, through the relationalities of these four analytical dimensions, we are able to understand how policies are embedded in complex multi-level governance arrangements, how they get structured spatially and in time, and the room of maneuver the different actors have, and how specific outputs are produced at different levels. So not considering sovereignty boundaries or policy design or the context in politics makes our understanding incomplete. So we want to understand the specific dynamic. So what about cities? Actually, cities, as the SDGs tell us, are important and relevant actors, both in social policies and in environmental sustainability policies. But we should not overestimate the role of policies at the urban level, their abilities and capabilities, because they are embedded in federal system or in states, and they have much more power in ability to intervene. We saw this, for instance, with COVID, and also with financial crisis in 2008. It was states which intervened more than cities, bailing out banks or whatever. So we should try to understand what the role of city is by considering these four elements I was mentioning. And as soon as we try this, we will immediately see that actually cities are not isolated actors. They are embedded in these multi-level governance arrangements. One important principle, which I think you are very well aware of, it's the subsidiarity principle. You are a federal country, so subsidiarity plays a major role in defining the institutional architecture of the whole of Brazil, because you have a federal level, you have a state, and the sub-state level as well. Subsidiarity is the principle that a central authority should have a subsidiary function performing only those tasks which cannot be performed at a more local level. It's a very banal definition, but actually it's a definition which produces a lot of conflicts. When you have scale reforms in the different countries allocating responsibilities to specific scales, the local scale might complain in front of a federal court or the national state or the federal level, and so there are scale conflicts. Okay, we don't need this. So where do we place social and environmental policies in this complex framework? Actually, I don't know, a Rubik cube you well know, and actually if we put the scales on one side of a Rubik cube, you put the institutions and actors on another scale, and the functions on another, you will see that the options are multiplying a lot. You can have funding, management, implementation, and regulation. You have the state, the market, the community, the family as important actors, and you have the local, the regional, the national, and the supranational level. Try to combine them. You know how many options there are? Really a lot. But it's not, so you can really see that it's not just the local. It's the local embedded in all of these activities, because the local involves regulations and other elements at other scales for all functions, not just regulation, not just implementation, etc. And it involves also all actors. Non-for-profit actors play a very important role in many countries, and actually they are more local, but not just local. So it's all of that at the same time. And here you can see that it's different actors at different levels interacting constantly. So it's a form of horizontal subsidiarity and of vertical subsidiarity. And they are intersecting. So you have intersecting subsidiarities of actors and levels. Our entry might be the urban, but in order to understand the urban, we need to embed them in all other relations, like the sources of PM 2.5, like the fact that if you are unemployed or poor, it's not just the city or the neighborhood which provides you with resources. So how can we use this framework? And I'm coming to my examples. I will skip one example because it's rather long, and I will dig into the Vienna example, which might be, I hope, interesting for you, given Vienna is considered to be an interesting example on many different aspects. So I will skip the rescaling jurisdictions examples, which is quite long. And sorry, it's really long. And now I'm coming to the second example, which puts in relation social policies, in particular with the example of housing, with environmental policies. So trying to see them not as separate, but in a dialogue. In Vienna. Vienna is the capital city of Austria, and Austria is in Europe, part of the European Union. But actually, it was part of the European Union not just 95. It was not one of the founding members, like Italy or France. So in Vienna, politics is very important. So the political dimension is key. Why? Because there is public land ownership. So the city of Vienna owns a lot of land, which is very important, of course. There is public ownership of water, energy, transport services. So the city owns water, energy, social insurances. It owns a lot of stuff. Economic interests are balanced by public direct intervention. So the city of Vienna regulates a lot of stuff. Welfare policies and social housing policies play a major role. And there is a vision of what a good city is. And I will try to make this clear with examples from housing and put housing in relation to environmental policies. By the way, this year, Vienna has been elected European Capital of Democracy also. So it's okay. So these are all part of the city of Vienna. They belong to the city. The city it owns. And you can walk in the city and you can have drinkable water everywhere. It's quite amazing. I think there are 1,200 fountains in the city of Vienna where people can refill their bottles for free. And it's extremely good quality water, which is important. Also for environmental issues, you don't buy plastics, you don't. So it's really important. Also the Wiener Linien, it's the transportation system of Vienna, which is extremely good. And it costs €1 a day. Wow. So it's quite cheap for European standards, of course. You might know this, I don't know, maybe some of you, maybe not. This is the famous Karl Marx Hof, which was founded in 1926, and it has more or less 5,000 inhabitants. It's the longest building probably in the world. It's more than 1.x kilometers long. And it has been refurbished recently. And it's social housing. And social housing in Vienna is very peculiar, and as I will show you, because it covers a lot of people in need, but not just people in need. And it has a very large coverage in the city. So this is the structure of the Austrian and Viennese housing market. And as you can see, social housing covers 43% of the housing stock. Market regulated housing is just 11%. So only 11% of the housing stock, it's on the market. All the rest is extremely highly regulated. And I will make you examples of what it means to be highly regulated, because it influences very much the social structure of the city. So you have also private rental, but private rental, it's also highly regulated. So it's not that you can charge free market whatever you want. It's highly regulated. Only 19% it's home ownership. 19. So which means 81% it's not home ownership, which is quite amazing. And out of this 43%, municipal housing is 21%, and limited profit housing associations housing, it's 22%. Altogether, it's slightly less than 500,000 flats. The city of Vienna owns, which means it's mine, 220,000 flats. And it has established a company for the maintenance of this housing because it's huge. So it's really something very peculiar. So also here in the market, the 11%, you might say, okay, this is market. Actually, also this one is very highly regulated, but not the price. It's highly regulated of the home, so you can buy and sell as you want, but the transactions cost are highly regulated, which means if you buy and if you sell, you have to go through very complex procedures, which take a lot of time and are very costly. And this is important. Why it's important? Because it cuts off gentrification. Because it's so expensive to buy and sell that you buy and you keep it. And, or at least instant gentrification, like in the US or the UK, where you buy, you sell, you invest. Or São Paulo, exactly. So The Guardian wrote, "The Social Housing Secret, How Vienna Became the Worst Livable City." The New York Times Magazine, "Imagine a renter's utopia. It might look like Vienna." 2 million. It's the 5th largest city in Europe, which it's almost 1/4 of the population of Austria. And Austria is probably 1/3 of the population of São Paulo. So São Paulo is 3 times the population of Austria, just to give you the sense of this one. And so this is communal housing. It has pools on the rooftop, and people pay little rent, and that's for them. So it's really incredible. You might not believe that. But the Vienna model is under pressure, as everywhere, of course. So growth of population, as you can see, it grew by 40,000 people in 1 year. For you, it might be nothing, of course, in São Paulo, but for Vienna, it's a lot. It's a small, medium European city inside the city of Vienna. And this was 2015 with a migration flow from Syria, the war in Syria. And so, and this is also influencing the changing labor market, because the inflow of migrants, in a way, brought about a slight polarization. So the middle class shrink from 51 to 38%. Vienna is the seat of the United Nations, of one of it, like New York or other places. There is the OECD, there is the ILO, there are a lot of international. There is OPEC also, where the whole crisis in 1973 started with the rising of a barrel for fuel, petrol. So we had at the federal level a deregulation, which is interesting because here the scale games play a very important role. Vienna is not only a city, but it's also a federal state. And this makes a whole lot of difference because it can regulate, it can redistribute resources, it can impose taxes, it has degrees of freedom that other cities do not have in many countries. There is a shrinking of the regulated private market, rental housing market. There were a lot of Airbnbs, etc. So what was the solution to Airbnb? Regulation. Now in Vienna, Airbnb can lend flats just 90 days per year, which cuts off the whole big speculators because they want to lend the whole year. And only 90, so it's 3 months per year. And it's a big difference, of course, as you can imagine. So how does Vienna address these challenges? The deregulation, the population growth, etc. It's a big challenge, and they invented, so they were socially inventive, using instruments in a very creative way, which when I learned about that, I was amazed because it was, Austria joined the European Union, and the European Union has the competition law. So if you have funding, public funding, you have to go through competition. And usually if you go through competition, you allocate the funding to the one who requires the lowest price, usually. No, they did it differently. They said, this is the price. We set the price. So the price is €7.60 per square meter. You have to compete. That's very important because you have to comply to competition law. You have to compete for the highest quality. So the incredible thing was that the real estate developers were not competing by producing the lowest quality for the lowest price, but for the highest quality for the specific set price, which was €7.60 per square meter, which is the rent paid by the people in limited profit housing association. So if you rent a flat in the limited profit housing association, which is 22% of the housing stock, you pay €7.60. So if you have 100 square meter, you have 760 euros, which I don't know how much reais are it.
Almost 6.
760 euros for 100 square meter. Okay. I don't know how much is it here, but for Vienna, it's really very low. And also in Europe, in every capital city in Europe, it's the lowest price you can ever find.
What is the minimum wage?
Good question. I don't know. Because they all earn above the minimum wage. So, but I will show you some income-related data, which are very relevant to access this kind of housing. So Vienna is using these developer competitions as a way of contrasting this kind. Then you have housing subsidies and you have active land policies. That means Vienna owns land, so it can intervene directly through housing policies because it owns. So Vienna is building social housing still. In most European countries, there is no social housing anymore. They sold out the housing stock. Berlin, in Paris. Well, Paris is still good, but other cities are performing very badly. Okay, so we don't need to see this. So how inclusive is Vienna spatially? That's interesting because usually you have highly segregated cities where the poor are living in a specific neighborhood, the rich in another, migrants from specific ethnic groups in another neighborhood. In Vienna, social housing is not concentrated. It's spread all over the city. So the red dots are social housing and the blue ones are limited profit housing association, which means they are even in the most fancy neighborhoods where the billionaires' villas are. So you have the billionaire's villa and 50 meters from the billionaire's villa, you have a large social housing estate. And the kids share the playground. So that's very interesting and very important. It's totally mixed. So there is zoning, there is land banking, and there is a low segregation pattern. Also because they didn't sell out the social housing stock. So how is Vienna inclusive economically? And so what is the income threshold? And this is the example I was mentioning, to access social housing. Guess, what should be your income net per month to access social housing?
2,000 something.
2,000 euros? Okay, that's quite high.
I was
But
thinking about the variability of the rent. Like
yeah.
on target of your wage.
Ah,
the rent.
Okay.
It is.
That's a good point. In Milan, I think it's about 700 euros per month net in order to access social housing. And very few people earn this. So
300.
no, 300 is very low.
100. 700.
The income thresholds. I was shocked when I learned that because I thought it was not possible. It was 3,810 euros per month net, which is more than a full professor in Italy.
So you are
No, in Vienna I'm earning a bit more, but
if you keep your Italian
yes.
salary,
So that's really incredible because it's not the lowest classes. It's up to the middle classes, definitely. So that's for one person. So if you are a household of 4. So in Berlin it's 26,000 instead of 53. So you see, there is a big difference in Europe as well. So in Vienna, it's double the threshold of Berlin. So it means in Vienna, more middle classes can access social housing. And a 4-family household, it's 100,000 euros per year, which is really a lot. I was really surprised by that. That was the most incredible thing. And there is a lot of debate. Should we means test that? Should we target this, etc.? They try to keep it like that because they want to mix it. They don't want to have socially segregated groups moving into social housing.
Is self-important? There is no means test. What should you prove? How do you prove your income?
Well, no, you have to show the pay slip, of course. So how does it look comparatively in Europe, at least? In Europe, it looks like that. So Vienna has a more stable social housing structure. As you can see, the social housing is 43%. In Berlin, it dropped from 30% to 10% because they sold it out. Hamburg, the same, 36 to 8%. That was terrible. London, not too bad, from almost 30% to 22%. Paris was, together with Vienna, one of the few cities where it increased. But the banlieue in Paris is a bit more problematic than in Vienna. But as you can see, the market influences was in 91 just 3% in Vienna. It was really almost a socialist city. And now it's 11%, which is really very little. If you look in Germany, it went up to 75% or 68%.
And in London?
And in London, it's a lot, but in London, it's more home ownership.
No, I mean, in 1991,
yes.
13%.
Yes, it was very low.
Yeah. After the liberal conservative.
Exactly. It increased, it doubled.
26,
it doubled. But in London, the home ownership played a very important role. And you have, in order to access mortgage, you have to take loans for 30 years because you cannot afford the price of housing. And indeed, you were mentioning the indicator, how much of your income should go to housing. In Europe, you consider if you pay more than 40% of your income, it's not good. That's the 40% threshold, so to say. So guess which is the city where you pay most? That's easy. It's where you pay more. Where you pay the share of population which pays more than 40% is highest in London. In London. And the lowest, that's very easy, in Vienna. And indeed, in Vienna it's 18%.
Only 6?
Only 18%. Berlin was dramatic. The last.
But Paris would be higher.
Yeah. And London is, of course, the highest. So in London, more than 60% of the population, so almost two-thirds of the population, pay more than 40% of their income on housing. So that's very unequal and very.
And the other share of the market?
The yellow is home ownership. The other. On the very top. Yes, these are other stuff. I don't really know what kind of housing. In Paris, it's important, yes. It's almost 13%. Yeah. I think it's a cooperative-like style housing. So from that point of view, it's. But okay, so as you can see, comparatively, Vienna was able to, at least so far, to keep the inequality dynamic under control. One further secret of Vienna is putting environmental and housing policies in a dialogue in relation to one another. So what does it mean? It means that the jurisdiction, Vienna, and the policy instruments, regulations, said, when you build new houses, you have to give one share of these new houses to social housing, which is very important. And the environmental standards should be extremely high. So you were able to put the two in a dialogue so that also the social allocated housing should be with high environmental standards, which is the big difference. Because usually you have a wonderful zero emission flat, but then you have to pay 3,000 euro per square meter. Like the example of Milan. But actually in Vienna, it's socially controlled. And by being socially controlled, it means that the costs of being environmentally friendly is not translated, it's not offloaded to the tenant, which is the most important element. So avoiding offloading environmental costs on socially vulnerable groups. This brings about the socialization of green transition costs. Who pays for the green transition costs? So this is social housing. When I show this to my Italian students, sometimes, no, middle upper classes, actually, because you have gardens. Look at this. So this is limited profit housing associations, because social housing is less than €7.60. It's €6.80 per square meter, so a bit lower. So they have high environmental standards, which are related to district heating, which is less polluting. It's well isolated, so you don't have dispersion of energy and things like that. You pay very little energy costs. And you try to have a balance of green around, and you have things like bees hotels. Yes, yes. I also ask myself, what are bees hotels? So for insects. Yes. Yes, exactly. You have urban gardening on the rooftop. You have sauna. You have libraries within the building.
In the social housing?
In the social housing. The newly built.
Right here.
Exactly the same.
Yes.
You have community rooms. So you have a community kitchen where people usually do also, I don't know, birthday party and inviting people, or 1 month's meeting of the people living there, etc. So all of that has high social and environmental standards, which is, I think, the most interesting elements, because in most cities, actually environmental policies and social policies are conceived separately in a silo administrative boundary structure. And they were able to break these boundaries and put them in a dialogue somehow. So how was all of this possible so far? That's the question. So through active subsidiarity and multi-level governance. So Vienna combines being a state with being municipality, so it has jurisdictional powers. So jurisdictions are very important in this case. Regulatory powers, a vision, of course. So the contextual element in terms of culture, in terms of, so it has also a historical legacy of Red Vienna. So Red Vienna is more than 100 years old. The first social housing I was showing you are now more than 100 years old. And we had this is actually the cover of the exhibition of 100 years anniversary of social housing in Vienna. Such a big thing. Very interesting. People were proud of living there. So they were not feeling segregated or stigmatized by living in social housing. They were proud because it was a sign of communal, whatever, vision, idea. If you once come to Vienna to the RC21 conference in 2026, we will have an excursion in the social housing districts as well.
And walk around.
And we will walk around, yes, definitely. No, that's
Not by bus.
No, by bus, no. Or if you go by bus, you get off the bus and you walk. And you talk to the people.
Okay.
Can you imagine when they were built in the 30s, 20s or 30s? there were cleaning brigades, so cleaning stuff, cleaning the flats of the blue-collar workers, because the blue-collar workers, men and women, were working in the factories. So they were tired in the evening. So there were brigades cleaning their houses.
It's like utopia for us, you know.
It's unbelievable. I also couldn't believe that. And actually,
Do you have pictures of this?
yes,
Do they make a,
there is a museum which shows all of this. And it's really interesting because you see how it worked. They were taxing the rich, and through these taxes, they were building housing, social housing. And in almost 5 years, they were building 60,000 flats, because in the 30s, there were a lot of housing shortages from migration, from stuff like this. And so they were in a situation of need. So that was the solution of the red government of the city of Vienna in the 30s.
But they already had the land and had to build, or they bought land?
No, they had it. They had the land, yes. That's a big difference indeed.
They have a lot of land stocks.
Having the property of the land for a public actor is very important. Helsinki had a lot of public land. Most Nordic countries have public land, so cities can act as actors more freely. If you don't have it, you have to intervene through regulation, which is different because you create sometimes disagreements. So this is a very important element. So the jurisdiction, the policy instruments, and the vision behind that. So regulatory frameworks of Vienna's urban institutions continue to play a strategic role in mitigating the repercussions of external crises. So the 2008 financial crisis in Vienna was not so much perceived because it's all public property. Strong governmental intervention in key policy areas, so housing, labor market, environmental policies, which retains an important redistributive function, protecting vulnerable groups. So, and the autonomy acquired by the city as a consequence of rescaling processes enabled the city to complement and compensate federal policies. This is very interesting because at the federal level, there were the conservatives very often, and the conservatives were going market. So Vienna developed, for instance, for labor market policies, very peculiar labor market insertion policies within the Vienna state, compensating for the cuts at federal level, which was incredible. And it clearly shows how the two levels were in a contrast. So politics plays an important role, but also jurisdictions, which allows politics to be in contrast to another level. So if you don't have politics and jurisdictions within the same analytical framework, you don't understand how this game plays out.
Was it Vienna ruled by left-wing government?
Always. Almost in the last 100 years, except the Nazi period, where there was the occupation of Vienna. But actually, since ever, there is Social Democratic Party in government in the city of Vienna. In the last 3 mandates, the last one, so the current one, the Social Democratic Party is in coalition with the Liberal Party, which is very small. And in the previous 2 mandates, it was in coalition with the Green Party, which was interesting because they were developing a lot of green and social policy. But the Social Democrats were a bit fed up of the Greens because the Greens were very demanding. And in the last elections, both the Social Democrats and the Greens won. So the Social Democrats made a coalition with the Liberals because the Liberals were very small. So they even gained an assessorship, or how you say, the alderman. So states, yes, exactly. And so the Liberal Party in the electoral campaign said, we want to sell out the social housing stock, we want to whatever. And after the coalition, nothing more. So they accepted everything from the Social Democratic Party. They got the sort of education because the liberals are very important. Education is important to the liberals in a way in Europe. And so we were happy with that. So that's a very important element, which explains a lot of how the dynamic took place. So using our analytical framework allows us to understand how global challenges transform into territorialized inequality patterns and how Vienna, in that case, resisted these trends so far. So the global challenges are filtered through jurisdictions, policies, policy instruments, context, and politics. And they produce differentiated local patterns and outcomes. So politics is key in all of that. In synthesis, politics in Vienna, using its jurisdictional powers, develop specific policies to address contextual pressures, putting forward a social municipalist political agenda in a way. More progressive than many other cities in Europe for sure, but also in Austria. Austria is a relatively conservative country, as you might know. Is this the best solution? Good question. Maybe for Vienna, but for the others, we don't know, because jurisdictions might be different. Land ownership is different. The contextual elements are different. Also, the policies developed by the different governmental actors are different. So it is this peculiar mix or ways in which the four elements combine, which produces the very specific case of Vienna.
But there are some logics that are really interesting that maybe like having a price and then demanding quality.
That was amazing. I was so fascinated by that, because they said, okay, we adopt the competition law, no problem, but we reverse the logic. So you have to compete for the highest price, not for the lowest, for the highest quality and not for the lowest price.
Guys, we are broadcasting. We shouldn't talk now. Sorry for you are being messy. We have to wait for him to finish and then we open, because otherwise who is listening through YouTube cannot understand anything. Sorry, just a second.
Okay, so this is a synthesis. So what should we do? We should put forward a relational understanding of social and environmental policies, so sustainability or whatever, being aware that it is a territorial and a relational construction. Trying to understand social and environmental sustainability policies in complexity and in flux, retaining what is specifically technical, what behavioral, what urban and what national or supranational, and the rational behind differences. In Europe, we have also the European Union as a level. And it's interesting because the European Union has no jurisdiction for social policies, but it has a lot of jurisdiction for environmental policy. So the European Union sets the standards for air quality or water quality, or so blue and green qualities. And the Green Deal now also sets several standards. And however, it has no control on social policy. So the two domains at European level are disconnected. In Vienna, we're connected, and that's the big advantage of a city. And okay, so cities are increasingly recognized as important actors in global sustainability governance. Also, the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development highlighted that they play a very relevant role. Also, because cities are considered to be hubs of social innovation, of creativity, of experimenting, pioneering and stuff. But at some point, you have to upscale. Otherwise, it remains isolated at the local level. Like participatory budgeting. Sometimes, if you keep it in the neighborhood, it's a problem. So if I'm living in another neighborhood, I have not the same chances or the same wonderful experiments and opportunities. So there is an issue of upscaling there, which is not easy because, okay. So these are the books I was referring to. I sent some of these publications to Renata, so she can distribute them to everybody if you want, or maybe you already have. Most of them are open access, but not all. And no, only the introduction. But the article is open access, and also this book is open access. So if you want to know more about the city of Vienna, it's open access. You can download it from Routledge, and it's a small handy book with chapters on housing, on environment, on labor market, and on government. So, question, comments?
Thank you very much, Yuri, for a really interesting presentation. Now we all wanted to live in Vienna. So now we'll collect questions, and you all should come here and talk in the mic. No? Oh, you have no. At least, but you have to use the mic. Oh, sorry. But yeah, Ursula, and I have my comments later. Do you mind if we collect a few questions?
No
okay. I have the online here.
Yes. I can stop
Go ahead.
Can I go? Okay. So Yuri, thank you very much for your presentation. So interesting. I had no idea of the social housing policy in Vienna. I was wondering, how do you fund that? How, of course, I'm thinking about budget, but also the taxes, local taxes, national taxes, who pay taxes? These people, they have the social housing, are they paying taxes?
Yes.
Which kind of taxes? Direct taxes or IVA? What kind of taxes do you have? How can you fund all this policy? It must be very expensive to have this margin of social housing you have in Vienna.
That's a good question indeed, because as Josef Schumpeter was saying, if you want to understand things, you have to follow the money, where it comes from and where it goes to, and beyond ideology. And actually, you pay a lot of taxes in Austria.
Everybody.
I pay 50%, everybody pays. So tax evasion is very low, and the share of taxes is up to 50% of the income.
So wealth taxes and also property, because property taxes, that's a problem if you have social housing.
You pay both property taxes and income taxes.
Okay.
So it's not a tax haven, Austria, definitely not. You pay a lot, but I'm happy to pay taxes because I get I get services actually. I went for a tough surgery a few years ago, and the system worked fantastically. Okay. I get the exams where I went to the public system.
But more specifically, the funding for this social housing comes from Vienna or the national collecting?
It comes both.
Both.
It's a combination of both.
Okay.
So Vienna tops national because there are federal laws, of course, but the local level tops that up. In particular through the maintenance. And they try to have a system that the rent pays for the maintenance.
Okay.
So the €7.60 for the limited profit housing association flats are intended to be cost covering.
Okay.
So the model is designed in a way that once it got subsidies. The interesting thing, there are a lot of details, as you can easily imagine, because the Limited Profit Housing Association was developed by the conservatives.
Oh, okay.
Because you were acquiring the right to buy after a certain number of years. And most of the lender outside of Vienna were providing this opportunity to the people who are into these flats. Vienna, giving additional subsidies, says we don't want to sell. We want to keep that public. So you don't have the right to buy. You pay your rent, which is very low, so it's not a problem actually. But they keep the right to buy limited. And it's cost covering from that point of view. So the economic model should be self-sustaining in a way.
Thanks a lot. It was wonderful and very, very interesting. And I would have tons of questions, but the first actually you just answered. was about maintenance, because one of the things that people say about council housing in the UK is that the problem is exactly maintenance. So and not only the cost, but also the effort, the public efforts of organizing maintenance for that. I would ask you more to tell us more about the actors involved in this, because in the French case, the solution is associated to the existence of some certain kinds of private but public actors that are in maybe similar to these limited profit organizations, but there are actors that we don't have in Brazil. We have just the public companies and private actors for profit developers and things like that. And we have also social movements that are cooperating or creating cooperatives to produce housing, self-help housing. But this is over a system in which is just private and public. So this might be and I would ask you to elaborate more also on the connection between the wonderful example you gave us and the theoretical model, the analytical framework, because it was clear to me the role of policy instruments, also the role of vision, jurisdictions. I don't know if I understood correctly, but because they may be different things. So that's it.
Yes. Well, these were three
Well,
questions.
Hi. Okay.
Okay.
It's a round of people asking, not a round of questions. So too many questions by people. Well, first of all, thank you for an amazing presentation. I'm still mesmerized by the Vienna housing social policy. Maybe I'm thinking in moving there soon. But well, so first, I was wondering, whenever you make a city such a nice place to live, you invite people from all destinations to move in. So in certain cities like Vancouver, you can deal with that because the market resolves that. No? So it comes just, it's a so nice city, but a so expensive city that actually it's solved. Not everybody is moving there. But in Vienna, that's not the case. So how they are facing the pressures of immigration, and not from other countries, Austrian immigration. So I think that would be a major challenge if they keep this kind of policy. The second, it's more kind of theoretical about your framework. If I'm right, I think that 3 parts of your framework are already in the multi-level governance, because sovereignty is about levels. Politics is about actors shifting from levels and pressuring, and politics and policies is at the core of the analysis. No, so I would say the part that seems new to me is the context, which is not in the multi-level governance approach. So I would like to hear you about what do you think that it's new in this, and how you differentiate it from your previous work on multi-level governance and other authors' work on multi-level governance, such as Sellers. And finally, I was wondering about the subsidiarity principle and how does it place in your analysis. Is it a normative principle, or I was wondering, because what level is in the best place for deal with a problem is not something that could be answered beforehand. It's not about the place which is nearer to the people, it's about state capacities which are politically built through trajectories.
Inequalities,
so
never local.
So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I think you have a lot.
Yes.
I have questions, but I will.
Yeah, thank you. Otherwise, I would be overwhelmed. Okay, so let's start from Eduardo's question about maintenance, which was partly addressed, but actually I have a few more details because I think they are very important. The big problem of Vienna is that the housing stock is quite old because they have been built in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, etc. And with the energy crisis, they need to be refurbished, etc. So there is a plan of having, I don't remember the exact percentage, but there is 1% per year to be retrofitted to be energy efficient. The COVID shaped this a bit because for 2 years funding was diverted, so they stopped refurbishing for 2 years, but they restarted again. So from that point of view, there is a public plan to get the green transition also within the social housing. You were mentioning also the issue of actors. Actually, this is not only Vienna, but this is Austria in general. There is a very interesting and very important neo-corporative framing. So you have the trade unions, which play an incredible role, so very strong actor. You have the employers associations, who are also very relevant, and you have the state. And they always sit together around the table, take decisions, and find an agreement. Vienna, and not only Vienna, but also Austria, is one of the very few countries where the workers are covered by collective bargaining still. So I think it's the European countries with the highest coverage. So Germany was also very high, but after Hartz reforms, they collapsed. Vienna kept the level very high. So most of the workers are covered by collective bargaining, which gives, of course, the trade unions an immense negotiation power. So, and this characteristic actually is not just in economic policies or labor market policies, all policies, environmental policies, educational policies, housing policies, all policies, you have these actors sitting together, which is quite unique, and I start to appreciate this kind of things. I moved to Vienna more or less 10 years ago, and I was very surprised about all these regulations, all these compromises at political level. But actually, the employers always give something, the trade unions give something, the state gives something, and they find a suitable compromise, actually. And I'm surprised how this works. It's the conservatives wanted to dismantle the system, and they didn't succeed. Also because even the employers like this, because it reduces transaction costs. You know what to expect. You sit around the table, you find the solution. And that's really fascinating because even the employers appreciate this kind of system. So this is indeed very peculiar, and very important. The fact that they triangulate decisions always makes a big difference. And this is partly related to jurisdiction and politics in a way, in particular with the Vienna case. In the Vienna case, jurisdiction as an analytical dimension plays an important role because it defines the autonomy the city has vis-à-vis the federal conservative term somehow. So it was able to develop own labor market policies in contrast to the federal ones, or complementing the cuts of the federal government. It was able to define own environmental policies. It was able to define own participatory policies. In Vienna, you have now participatory budgeting for climate change mitigation measures, 20 million euros for 3 districts. Now they are expanding to 6 districts, and the next year 3 more districts. Vienna has 22 districts, and so giving a lot of money to, but Vienna is a very top-down setting, and also the participatory budgeting is very top-down, which is, it seems a contradiction in terms, but actually it's like that. Vienna is top-down, and it was able to achieve all this because it had the freedom to do that by law. So the jurisdictional definition of their powers, like in most federal systems for states, is given. So, so the jurisdiction played a very important role. The politics, as you also, you had always a social democratic mayor in Vienna who frames and defines the directions of the policies in a way. And just to connect to the question of migrants, which you were mentioning as one of the biggest challenges. Indeed, Vienna, when I moved 10 years ago, was 1.8 million. Now it's almost 2 million. So it raised in 10 years by 200,000 inhabitants, and in 2015 by 40,000. So that's a big issue. How is the city coping with that? Here, the issue of actors plays again an important role. And not only by these three actors I mentioned, so employers, trade unions, and state, but also non-for-profit associations, which are in a way, to reconnect to subsidiarity, a very important actor. So they are officially, publicly recognized as a relevant actor in politics, in not only in the implementation of policies, but also in the definition of policies. So they sit on the table saying, oh, we don't like this, we think this does not work well, etc. The example of migration is very clear. When we had loads of trains coming from the east, the state was not able to manage all of that. So actors like Caritas intervened quite substantially. And they developed, together with the state, with the trade unions, and with the employers, a joint platform to manage the complexity of influx, because it was incredible. And this reverberates in many domains. It's not just housing, giving these people a flat or where to live, but it also reverberates into how to transit these people into the labor market, or even more in detail, recognizing their education. People coming from Syria who are, I don't know, engineers. Austria is extremely rigid in educational recognition of certificates. So they needed to find a solution. And they developed extremely innovative projects, like, for instance, one project is called Du kannst was, which means you are able to do something. So they organize, so to say, reduced educational paths in terms of years, because you have already a degree or you know how. And this is recognized and certified. So they don't give up their certification, which would be one way of dealing with a crisis. But they keep the certification, but they ease the acquiring the certification in order to be able to enter into the labor market. And this has to do also with jurisdiction, because you are able to do that because you have the regulatory power to do that. So it's an interesting mix of all of that. And migration was indeed the biggest challenge in the last few years, which had also electoral consequences. In 2015, you had the extreme right on government in Austria, at the federal level, not at the local level. And this brought about a lot of restricting laws on migration. Still, Vienna acts like a sanctuary city in a way that migrants, refugees, etc., are more welcome in the city, and there is a concentration of migrants there, which somehow brought about declining income on average, and also of qualifications on the labor market in terms of education, etc. But still, so Vienna is seen actually as a problem case in Austria, because it has highest unemployment rate, it has highest migration concentration. Yes, exactly. That's a direct consequence. Exactly. So the bottom raised and they're extremely high. So the middle classes shrinked in a way. So, and this has partly to do with the context also. And the way in which I conceive the context in relation to the other three dimensions is that these three dimensions are in a relation with the context. So the context produces specific needs, specific, and modifies also the policies when they are implemented. So the street level bureaucracy, in a way, has an incredible power in modifying, and it's modifying because there are specific contextual pressures. So for instance, the migration flow brought about pressure on the housing market, on the labor market, on services to the population. So if you go to a hospital, you have, they don't give up forms to be filled in. They are very bureaucratic in Austria. So the bureaucracy is really a Habsburgian legacy in a way. But you have the forms in 10 languages. So in Russian, Croatian, Serbian, Bosnian, whatever kind of, so that the people have an easier access. There is some degree of racism in Austria in general, but I would say in Vienna much less. And the policies developed to include this, these groups of people are quite well developed. And actually, the building of new flats was one of the solutions to this population growth somehow. And by building new flats, you have to allocate a share. If you build, I don't know, 100, you have to allocate, I don't know, 35% to social and affordable housing, another 40% to regulated housing, and only 10 to 15, 20% to the free market. And for those who are interested in vertical dimension, it's interesting because in Vienna, the regulation of the attic, so the top floor, it's outside the regulation. So it's on the market. So there is a vertical segregation in a way. In the top floor, you can charge whatever. Only the top floor. That's crazy. But it's for the top society.
May we go to another round?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Okay, I will collect first, and then I will use my power. Yeah, sorry. And then we collect, because it's related to Eduardo's and Adrian's point, Yuri. Here at CEN, at Center for Metropolitan Studies, we are all enrolled in researches using this concept of multi-level governance, and we are also trying to compare different types of social policies and also urban policies. Eduardo and myself, we just finished an article on this, comparing. Yeah, you should read this. Yes, yes, I shouldn't. We are comparing social assistance and housing policies in São Paulo, trying to see the common dimensions. And we are dealing, your model, it's really interesting. Yeah, the 4 dimensions: sovereignty, policy design, context, and politics. But one of the big questions is how we can combine those dimensions, and how we can, and I would like to hear more from you about the scale games, because these are really, really important for us. Moving away a little bit from the Vienna case, because it's like a paradise for us, and we are really, really far away from this, and how we deal with these scale games, and how these scale games affect the power relations among the actors enrolled in those games. And we are talking about local experience that are like pioneering experience that scale up to the federal level. Conditional cash transfers were like this. But once they get there, they have a regulatory power that affects the local level. So we have both games being played. The Bolsa Familia, it's a federal program, but we also have specific social assistance policies at the local level, and they have to interact to each other. And I could give another examples. And you are also talking about coalitions between types of actors, political coalitions. And we are also thinking about policy communities. Because when you are talking about how social policies and environmental policies may be together, maybe play it together. I think it's very context specific, you know, because what types of actors are thinking about the problems and the solutions in those fields. So here at SEBRAP, at least at SEN, we are trying to deal with this category of policy communities. What type of subsystem of policies? Because when multi-level governance is a useful concept, when we deal with this type of boundary problems such as migration, pollution, etc., and here inequality or social exclusion. But it's not easy to put people together, and there are path dependency issues. So time is lacking in your model, at least from my point of view. How you are dealing with this path dependence and historical perspective, because the part of the success of Vienna is constructed historically, and we cannot repeat this, right? So great for Vienna, but how we can use your model to think about our case is just this. Thank you. And now I will open to another question.
Hello, Yuri. Thank you for the presentation. I thought the case study was very interesting, and particularly this marriage between social housing and environmental concerns. Because I'm studying in my PhD research the connection between climate policies and urban planning policies, and particularly how they connect with this idea of promoting green infrastructure.
Okay.
And what I see in the cases that I'm looking at is that these policies to promote green infrastructure, they are totally removed from considerations of social justice, inequality, etc.
Exactly.
They're mainly incentives for upscale buildings to put like green roofs or etc., etc. So I was wondering, in the case of Vienna, if this framing was something that was mobilized perhaps by social actors, or if it was something that came. I wanted to know where this very concrete marriage came from.
Okay, wonderful question. Thank you.
Anybody else in general? Okay. Oh, Thiago.
Hi, Yuri. Hi, everyone. Sorry I couldn't see your presentation from the beginning, but if I make any stupid question because you already touched it, just forget it. But I was wondering on the topic our colleague started on the pressure that new social groups coming into Vienna can, make. But specifically, I was considering if there's a risk that Vienna becomes something like a new Barcelona on this transnational gentrification, because it's a cool city. It's always top ranked in this best city to live in the world and things like that. And if it's so, is there any, concern institutionally speaking on that?
Okay, thank you. Maybe I can, yes, otherwise I'm not able to. About the multi-level governance of different policy domains, the first example was addressing precisely this aspect. And so this is a graph that shows the downwards mobility of a person who loses a job. So you first pay contributions, so you work, fine, everybody's happy. And if you work at least for 52 weeks, you are entitled to get unemployment benefit. And you get unemployment benefit, which corresponds to 55–60% of your income. And you can get it for a limited amount of time. Then you might get unemployment assistance, which is means tested. This is not means tested. You can be a billionaire and you become unemployed, you will get it anyway because you paid contributions. So it's a way of acquiring rights. The other one, it's an unemployment assistance. You get it if you are with an income below a given threshold. So it's means tested. And this is federal. If after a certain period of time, which is 1 year more or less, you didn't find a new job, you get into social assistance, which is local in Austria. So you have here an interaction between scales. And the interesting element is that each scale bears the costs. So, and each scale doesn't like to bear the cost, as you can easily imagine. So there is a revolving door strategy. So if you go down to the local level, the local level says, okay, my goodness, another unemployed person. So I will retrain this person. And by retraining this person, I'm paying contributions. And by paying contributions, I'm putting this person again into the federal program, because by paying contributions, you acquire specific rights. It's not anymore means tested. So if a person doesn't find a job after a certain period of time, the person has at least paid the contribution. So it's again a problem of a federal level and not of a local. So, and this is, I think, the analytical framework shows that the jurisdictions and the policies interact in ways which produce some specific political dynamic, which, okay, I don't want to pay the costs. So money is, again, important. And so some are local, some are national. And so there is this multi-scalar dimension. Another way of addressing, and this is different from country to country, of course. In Italy, it's different again, etc. I think you remember this graph from some other presentations. And as you can see here, it's different from country to country. So the level at which policies are regulated and implemented and funded differs substantially. Here we have 4 examples: Italy, Finland, France, and Poland. And this is a fascinating comparison because, can I stand up or not? Yes. Maybe. Yeah.
Use this.
Okay. Because I want to show you the things on the graph. So Finland is a small country, but it's a very rich country. It's a country where policies play a very important role, where inequalities are considered badly. Inequalities are not good in Finland. They had a big crisis on the labor market, and they decentralized a lot of labor market policies. So you see the green line is the local level, and it increased in relevance in the 90s. Then they realized that by decentralizing policies, they were producing more inequality. Inequality in spatial terms. So some cities were more inclusive than others. So they said, no, we don't like this. And they upscaled again some elements. But they did not do it in jurisdictional terms. They did not say, no, you are not doing well, we take you away. They said, you can do your policies, but I define some guidelines and some thresholds. You cannot offer below this. If you go above, no problems, but below, no. And this, in a way, created some common standards, which was nice. Very interesting is, of course, France. France is a very centralized country. Italy had a constitutional law which decentralized, as you can see, with the rise of a region. It was a constitutional reform in 2001, and which allocated responsibilities for social policy to the regions, which was a bit of a mess in a way. And Poland is also very interesting because Poland joined the European Union much later. And by joining the European Union, you have to subscribe to the subsidiarity principle, which is Article 5, one of the key principles in the institutional architecture of the European Union, which is an interesting institutional experiment for multi-governance scholars. And by subscribing to the subsidiarity principle, they had to decentralize policies. They could not have all policies at the state level. In Poland, it was 100% state. So they decentralized to gminas and voivodeships several policies, so they acquired new. So as you can see, the dynamic is quite different, but at the same time, the level which gained most relevance is the local one, which increased everywhere, even in France. In France, it increased more implicitly because it was the creation of the départements. France, as you know, is a very fragmented country in terms of municipalities. They have, you know how many municipalities? It's a country of 60 million inhabitants, and they have 16,000 municipalities.
Wow.
Also 200 people, 500 people, and they cannot they cannot afford any service, because if you have a mayor, it's a one-person show doing everything. So they created the department, where they put several municipalities together, so at least they were able to afford one social worker, one whatever. The same in Italy. Italy has a bit less municipality, it has only 8,000, but still they created similar structures to put together a critical mass of administrative power to be able to intervene. So from that point of view, I think it's interesting to see. I know I wanted to show you things change actually. So this, sorry, another one. Zack. Here. So the economic crisis in 2008 and the pandemic brought about a recentralization in almost all countries. Italy had a quite strong decentralizing trend, but it stopped. Then the league, which was the regionalizing power, does not talk anymore about that. Finland re-centralized, Poland re-centralized, France was central. So the crisis usually brings about re-centralization tendencies. Why? Because of control of resources and money. So bailing out banks or other institutions was important. Okay, so this was about the multi-level governance and the different level. But you mentioned also path dependency. And actually, the concept of context, which I brought as an analytical element, is not only spatial, but it's also historical. So if you develop a policy in an economic booming period, it's different than developing a policy in an austerity period, because you don't have resources to have compromises. So there is more conflict, or there is more whatever. So history is also a context from that point of view. And indeed, Vienna has this legacy. And we cannot. So it's difficult for any other place to develop this kind of policy, of course. But the limited profit housing association as a tool can work well also elsewhere. So the point of having best or worst practices is to understand the contextuality of a best practice, why it is working so well in that place, trying to understand the analytical elements of why it is working well, and see where you want to import it, if these elements are given or not, because just importing the practice does not succeed, does not work well. So I'm very critical about the concept of best practice. So now, okay, good. That's very good. And so from that point of view, I think it's important to consider the contextuality also in temporal time. When there was the green just transition, actually the concept of justice was the one connecting the two. That's why social housing has now to have high environmental standards. Only this way you are able to control the redistributive effects of environmental policy. Otherwise, if you leave the just part out, it's just the rich who can afford the green transition. So for instance, by retrofitting the social housing, the cost of a rent is kept low. It's not the costs are not offloaded to the tenants. Of course, it costs a little more, but not much more as if the market would work. So from that point of view, politics plays an important redistributive role by not offloading the costs of the green transition to the most vulnerable groups, which is very important indeed. Otherwise, you have all these green gentrification processes taking place, also in Barcelona. Think about the blocks, how are they called? Super blocks. Wonderful. Everybody would like to want to live in a super block, and the prices in super blocks raised. So not everybody can afford it. And Barcelona has not 43% of social housing, it has 6%. So that makes a big difference. They can't have control of the housing stocks. And the concerns of gentrification and the issue of gentrification. Vienna, when I moved to Vienna, my Austrian colleagues were saying, Vienna is neoliberalizing, Vienna has a lot of gentrification, Vienna is... And when you look into the key indicator of evictions, because displacement is part of the analytical element of gentrification. If you don't have evictions, no evictions. Extremely high tenants protection law. You cannot evict anybody. So how does gentrification work in Vienna? You wait until the person who is living in that apartment dies. So it takes decades to have a gentrification process of an old building because the last person has to get out of that building. And so there is gentrification, but it takes place without evictions over a long period of time of several decades, which means the social negative consequences of a process are not so strong. And indeed, in Vienna, they call it soft renewal rather than gentrification because it's regulatory based, it's controlled very strongly. So from that point of view, and indeed, people do not buy houses, flats in Vienna. I wanted to buy a flat, but it's so expensive. It's not worth buying it. So I went. Yeah.
Anybody else? No?
I don't know if online there might be
Yeah, online there was a similar question to mine. There was someone asking, there is a nice compliment. Oh, Lucas Souza, wonderful. Yuri, you are really nice. Like, Yuri é fera. Yeah, and Renata, you are really nice as well. Nice. And Eduardo, yeah, it's true. And Eduardo Conceição asked, good afternoon, Professor Yuri. To combine the different dimensions and types of variables, what is your opinion on the use of principal component analysis and groupment analysis in such a context? And how to combine the dimensions in a more empirical way?
Yeah, that's a very good question indeed, because this is an analytical framework. Then you have to translate it through methodologies in acquiring data. I try to use a mixed method approach where I combine hard data on the social housing estates, etc., and all of that, with process tracing. I particularly use process tracing because it allows me to identify specific critical junctures in multi-level governance trends, in a way. So when some reforms are taken and responsibilities are reallocated across different scales. And I like process tracing. I can show you a few. Let me see. Somewhere I think I had somewhere a process tracing thing. Well, this is partly related, but actually here, this one. Jurisdictions and policy instruments changing multi-level governance arrangements. So there are important policies and reforms, critical junctures at supranational level, European level, you have national level, and the local level. What I tried here is to see the synchronization of changes or what happens. And so I highlighted here the convergence criteria and competition law, which were quite relevant in Europe because they influence very much the management of public funding. And Austria, by accessing the European Union, had to comply with all these regulations, so which are quite heavy. But they developed this developer competition. So that was in a way, I'm more an institutionalist, as you might have realized. So I'm looking at how institutions react to specific pressures or things like that. And indeed, so another example on jurisdictional power. And so usually in order to access social housing, you have to be a resident in the city for 5 years at least. Vienna reduced this to 2 years. It's interesting because it opens up the inclusion to a lot more people. And so this was contrasted by the federal level, etc. Vienna wanted, for instance, to give the possibility to vote for local elections to people. The federal court ruled against that. So there are a lot of options which show the contrast and the conflicts across levels. But Vienna is extremely, you know how many employees has the city of Vienna? So it's a 2 million city. It has 66,000 employees. It's a medium-sized European city. It's really a lot.
So São Paulo has 1,125,000.
So 100,000 employees?
100,000.
Okay. Okay. But it's also 24 million.
Yeah, it's 6 times the population with double
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
citizens.
Yeah. And another interesting number for Vienna is the Caritas, which is a NGO, or I don't know. It's a faith-based organization, but it's actually they care about faith, but they are not fixed, so they welcome also Muslims or whoever. You know how many employees has the Caritas of Vienna? 6,000 employees. 6,000 employees tenured, not fixed contract, which is a lot. It's really a lot. And you have a lot of PhDs working for Caritas. So the PhD in Austria is a normal attainment also to go on the labor market. It's not just an academic title. Well, it is an academic title, but you can spend it also on the labor market. People appreciate that you have a PhD.
It's another word.
In Italy, it doesn't make any sense. So if you have a PhD, who cares?
Yeah, here.
But in Austria, if you have a PhD, actually it matters. Yeah. So it's
another one.
Yeah, I'm very surprised, really. When I moved, I discovered a new world. I didn't expect it. No. Well, coming from Italy, it's not the same, but closer.
Caritas is also working in Italy, right?
Who?
Caritas.
Yes, Caritas is a world organization.
Yeah.
Just adding something about the case, but trying to learn from the case to a broader thing about the relations between states and capital cities, which I have been thinking about this a lot in the comparisons we have to make, because we compared São Paulo usually with capital cities, and this is a problem, or this has to be accounted for, this difference, because capital cities are always bailed out or rescued by the national state. But in your case, you are suggesting that for political reasons, Vienna is a capital city, but at the same time is more or less not in tune with the federal government, with the national government. So you have a case of multi-level governance with a federal system in which the capital city is more or less against the state, or vice versa, or maybe against it too strong.
It's too strong.
But not really. So how this really happens in terms of policy, not in terms of politics, because the mayor may be shouting and everything, and then signing all the contracts and getting money.
Of course.
So how this works in policy production?
That's a good point indeed. Yes, of course.
In this question, Eduardo's question, what's the percentage of federal grants in Vienna budgets? Do you know? Because if they have more local money than federal money, this makes a lot of difference in politics. Like in São Paulo.
I have to check that. I think it's 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 federal. Because it's based on population. So, because that's an interesting element of a federal system. It's not political. It's technical. You have a financial compensation fund at federal level, which compensates poorer region against richer regions, which most federal countries have, I guess also Brazil. Actually, in Europe, Belgium, of course, Germany, Austria, they all have the so-called Finanzausgleich, which is a perequation fund, which reallocates part of the resources acquired at federal level from the rich to the poor. And this is usually a matter of conflict across Bundesländer, because the richer don't want to pay the poor. So this is a heated debate in the chamber, in the lower chamber of the parliament, where the Länder are represented. And there is a negotiation, there is some degree of negotiation, but there is always a compensation, which is very interesting. It's very technical, but it's fascinating because in a way creates a sort of national cohesion policy somehow between the richer and the poorer region. It's very interesting. The case of Germany is extremely interesting because Germany had during the Industrial Revolution, the North was very powerful. The rural area where the heavy industries were very rich. And the South was not poor, but poorer than the North rich. And so the North was against giving resources to the South. And then there was the 1973 crisis, and the Fordism collapsed, and the North became a problem region, and the South became a very rich region because there were small and medium-sized enterprises which were more flexible, etc. And then with the unification of Germany, the East-West. So there was North-South, which reversed, and then there was East-West. So that fund is, that would be a PhD worth, comparing all the conflicts between the different Länder across time. But it's that kind of mechanism which works, yes.
Well, I think we had a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much, Yuri. We learned
really
a lot from you, and I'm glad you live in Vienna.
And that the next LC21 conference will be there.
Exactly. I'm really glad. Thank you.
No, thank you for the nice questions. No, this is just the hard numbers. So we have 920,000 flats in Vienna, or housing units. And this is the share of owned by the municipality, owned by non-profit housing association, so almost 400,000, owner-occupied housing, etc. So these are the hard numbers.
What is right?
Yes. This is the so-called political statement, which shows that all social housing in Vienna is built through these taxes, the Wohnbausteuer, which was a tax of the rich. And so this is 1924, so one of the first. And they proudly put this kind of sign on all social houses, so that the people see where the money from the rich goes for the poor. It's really a political statement. So this was particularly big. So now it's a bit smaller. But still, you can easily recognize it, and in all neighborhoods, which is fascinating again. So, and you see, privately owned, it's 33%. But out of this 33, 22 are regulated, and only 11 are, as I mentioned before, on the market, which are 300,000. This is Limited Profit Housing Association, so the €7.60. And these are the €6.80 social housing.
LPHA are produced by private companies, but they have to fit in this
public framework, yes. Subsidized, so they don't pay corporate tax, for instance, so which reduces the costs. And they have to comply to the €7.60 per square meter costs, so that they cover also the maintenance in the years to come, which is a fascinating model because they reverse the logic. And, okay. So that was it.
But since we are ongoing, now you also mentioned the fact that the European Union regulates the environmental policies, but not the social policies. So the autonomy for social policies, it's much higher, right? So it's a different way of think about multi-level governance when we are comparing both. Could you please talk a little bit more on this, about this?
I call this intersecting subsidiarities because for the different policies, subsidiarity means something very different. And at the beginning of the European Union, when the prerogatives of the national member states were defined, the environment did not really seem very relevant. So member states said, okay, keep it at the European level. Now it becomes a strategic key element because it not only influences environmental policies, it influences industrial policies and everything. So people start to realize the big error the member states did by giving this prerogative to the European Union, which sometimes it's nice. I was involved in a big project, a European project, trying to study. You tell me when we have to finish. Huh? We are already over time.
I'm just checking if we have other questions.
Okay. And indeed, the way in which the member states and the people within the member states perceive and understand environmental issues, it's completely different from country to country. So we did a comparison with a heavy quantity comparison with 16,700 cases in 7 countries, representative for urban, rural, and age, education, income, etc. And people in Poland, for instance, have a completely different understanding than people in Austria or Italy or so. And how to combine this with social policy and with environmental justice, like your colleague here just mentioned. So that's because this influences the legitimacy of the policies which are implemented to contrast the green gentrification tendency. And to compensate the inequalities produced by green policies, which is an issue indeed.
Now I think we have to finish, but thank you very much. And we can, who are here, we can continue in the coffee, but thank you very much, Yuri.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the wonderful questions, actually. It's always nice to get nice questions.
And we have to exchange some material because we are dealing with this. Yes. I'm going to do this now.
Yes, please send me.
Yes.
I promise I will send you.
Yes, please. And I will send you about Vienna because we are studying this case.
And we are still live. We have to.
We have to close.
Yeah. No,
Studio Falassel. Studio reading studio.
Yeah. Just close. Now we can say whatever we should do.